Who heard a verse that sounded interesting and you'd like to look more deeply within it? Because we have a purport we can read. Yes, Balaram and Vaisesika?
I was thinking of 1.2.10, which
A wise choice.
I think it talked about a healthy life. That's what I remember. I just wanted to see what more is in there.
Would you read the purport?
Yes, Marge, I'll play. The completely bewildered material civilization is wrongly directed towards the fulfillment of desires in sense gratification. In such civilization, in all spheres of life, the ultimate end is sense gratification. In politics, social service, altruism, philanthropy, and ultimately in religion or even in salvation, the very same tint of sense gratification is ever increasingly predominant. In the political field, the leaders of men fight with one another to fulfill their personal sense gratification. The voters adore the so-called leaders only when they promise sense gratification. As soon as the voters are dissatisfied in their own sense gratification, they dethrone the leaders. The leaders must always disappoint the voters by not satisfying their senses. The same is applicable in all other fields. No one is serious about the problems of life. Even those who are on the path of salvation desire to become one with the absolute truth and desire to commit spiritual suicide for sense gratification. But the Bhagavatam says that one should not live for sense gratification. One should satisfy the senses only in so much as required for self-preservation and not for sense gratification. Because the body is made of senses, which also require a certain amount of satisfaction, there are regulative directions for satisfaction of such senses. But the senses are not meant for unrestricted enjoyment. For example, marriage or the combination of a man with a woman is necessary for progeny, but it is not meant for sense enjoyment. In the absence of voluntary restraint, there is propaganda for family planning. But foolish men do not know that family planning is automatically executed as soon as there is a search after the absolute truth. Seekers of the absolute truth are never allured by unnecessary engagements in sense gratification, because the serious students seeking the absolute truth are always overwhelmed with the work of researching the truth. In every sphere of life, therefore, the ultimate end must be seeking after the absolute truth, and that sort of engagement will make one happy, because he will be less engaged in varieties of sense gratification. And what that absolute truth is explained as follows.
Let's just see if we can find 3 points that stuck out for anybody, and you can amplify them. So if you heard something in there that sounded distinctive that you could repeat back, then we'll give you the microphone and you can tell us what it is. If you leave up the purport, then everyone can examine it and see if what they heard was accurate. But as we're, Vaisesika.
Hey Krishna Maharaj. I believe on Ram Navami, when we went into the room before the festivals began, you once asked like what is like wrong about what is one of the biggest flaws of this world, and the answer to that was like we have bad leaders. And in this purport, when we were reading it, I noticed that it kind of reminded me of what we were talking about in that day, that the voters and so-called leaders are only fighting with one another and aren't able to think about the bigger cause, because they're so in their own head about fulfilling their own self-desire, sense gratification, and like desires that they have. So I was just reminded about that from when you were talking about how we have bad leaders, and that's what makes everybody follow in the wrong direction.
Yeah, that's a nice point. I remember that. There's so much in the 12th canto about bad leaders and how everything got turned around in the world because of that. Still happening. It's one of the faults of Kali Yuga. Nice point. Thanks for picking that out. Balaram, you also had something, I thought.
I was just thinking how it was like the phrase that that stuck out to me was one should desire only a healthy life or self-preservation. As I was thinking that this like very important instruction that we've heard Srila Prabhupada always say, that health is very important, was in the Bhagavatam as well. And after reading through the purport, I think I got a better idea of of what that meant, and it is to dedicate our entire life to researching the absolute truth. And what I find interesting is that it should be like that. This is the goal of one's like life work, or this is like one's, I don't know how to phrase it exactly, but this is one's life's work. Um, and this is something we're working toward our whole life. And it reminded me of professors in academia where they dedicate their whole lives to researching something. And it's amazing to think that we're all really just trying to be scientists of the absolute truth and trying to understand more and more of it and relish it.
Nice point. And reminded me of something that happened to me recently. When I was in London, I met with a group of senior devotees, God brothers and God sisters, and some that were doing projects around the UK. And one of them was from Oxford. Oxford University, as many people know who are on the call here, is a reputable university, to say the least, in the UK. And one of this devotee, he heads up a project there at Oxford. So I just assumed that he was an academic or that he had some advanced degree. So usually when I meet interesting devotees, I get their contact and I try to stay in touch with them, or at least get to know them, to have another good associate in life and take advantage of their association. So I reached out to this person, and in a texting way through WhatsApp, I asked what his academic specialty was. And he said, "Oh, I didn't go to college," even though he runs the project. And he said, however, and he named how many years he had been studying the Bhagavatam and ISKCON, a few decades. And he said, so I kind of count that as a PhD. He said, I put in enough time for a PhD. And I've thought that frequently about how few people have a PhD in the Bhagavatam or even the Gita. And I do notice that people who have studied very intensely and written about the Gita, actually made more than a superficial study of it, tend to be not just very interesting, but also effective in the way they're able to teach and speak about things. So it's a worthy cause to make research into the absolute truth, especially through studying the Shastras, like you're all doing. Nice point. So that was 2. Our quote is 3. Can somebody else give a comment about anything you heard in the purport, or anything about the verse at all that catches your attention? Okay. Pakya Lakshmi?
Yes.
Okay.
So where it says that the leaders must always disappoint the voters by not satisfying their senses, I kind of related that to like the body and mind. The mind might want many things, but we should like turn it down, because it could be that could like stop us from thinking about Krishna and things like that. And then so we won't be going to our real destination, which is going to Krishna. So we should just control our mind. It might ask for anything that could be good or bad, but we should just control it and listen to our soul instead.
Wow, that was amazing. That's like, I think 25 points for that, but you can score more if you give us a reference verse. You get extra points on this show if you make a point and then you say that relates to this particular verse in the Gita or the Sri Upanishad or Divinity and Divine Service or anywhere else. What do you think, Pakia Lakshmi? So what you said was about how, according to the consciousness we develop, that it determines the way we go in life and maybe even the next life, right?
Yes.
Let's see if one of the learned pundits here can give a verse that supports that assertion of Pakia Lakshmi. I'm thinking of it in my mind, so if you can read my mind, you'll know what it is. Shall I give you a hint? Do you all know how to read minds? It's one of the arts. I'm going to think it really loud. I'm thinking it's super loud now. You should be able to hear it.
Could it be-
Okay, I'll give you clues. The verse has an expression you might make if you are given some prasadam and it's really tasty prasadam, and the first two things, which are the same word, it's the same word repeated, that you might say. Balaram, you're muted,
It's,
just in case you were saying it.
I think it was in the chat.
Oh, it's in the chat.
Someone said yum yum.
Yeah, let's try that. That chapter is all about attaining the supreme. Madhurisaki, since you actually, Pakia Lakshmi, why don't you read the verse? Because it's your excellent point you made, and then you'll just get automatic extra points for adding this verse.
Like the actual Sanskrit words.
Yeah.
Okay. Yam yam vapi smaran bhavam tyajatya antikale vayam tam tam evati panteya sada tat bhava bhavatiyaha.
Translation.
Whatever state of being one remembers when he quits his body, one son of Kunti, that state he will attain without failure.
Does that match at all to your point?
Well, kind of. Okay.
Kinda? Okay. Can you make your point again?
That when it says in the purport of it, there that you should control your mind, like how one leader should make sure like not satisfy voters for their senses just because they want it.
Right. What are the consequences if,
One might not be able to reach Krishna, which is their goal, and they'll be in this material world forever and be suffering.
yeah, very interesting. Nice point. Balaram, you want to make your point? You just put in the chat.
I was just adding another verse to 8.6 in the same direction. Should I read it out, Raj?
Yeah, please.
So this is Bhagavad Gita 15 chapter, the 8th verse. The living entity in the material world carries his different conceptions of life from one body to another, as the air carries aromas. Thus he takes one kind of body and again quits it to take another.
Can you say anything about that?
Carries the same point that we were talking about, how the living entity's consciousness defines the direction it takes after death. And as Paki Lakshmi was saying, that if our mind is not, I guess, if our mind is not Krishna consciousness, or we're not Krishna consciousness, Krishna conscious, then we will continue to stay in the material world, because our consciousness is lower than that.
It's good to know, right? That we're being accommodated for whatever desires we have. In the beginning of the 8th chapter, I think it's in the purport to verse number 3. You could look at that. There's a really interesting statement Prabhupada says about how what karma means. Says that, let's see, it's up near the top. Is this 8.3?
Yes, Maharaj.
Try 8.4. Try 8.2. Yeah, Arjuna asked about karma. So Aliyah, look at 8.3, and it's in the first paragraph. It says, that is karma. That's the last sentence. Or varied creation by the force of material consciousness. I have found that fascinating, because our own consciousness has a force in the world. And however it's developed, according to the verse you put up, that's what determines our next situation, which is just an accommodation of the demands of our own consciousness. So what the points that Pakya Lakshmi made and you made, just about how being dedicated to using one's senses and to develop the consciousness is so vital, because there's a consequence to it. It's not random how we're moving through the universe or even in our life. It doesn't happen by chance, but by design. And so these literatures talking about the science of consciousness really tells us how to develop it and what the consequences are going to be. Did any of that resonate? Part, what do you think? Part, you're on mute, but that's okay.